Alright, welcome back everyone. Today we're going to go over the part 1 video for the Dogmeat Fallout Precon deck. We're going to go over the commander and look at the deck analytics spreadsheet and go over kind of my experience playing this deck. Overall, this was a pretty fun deck to play. Had a lot of interesting elements and dynamics to it, but we're going to go ahead and get into that here in just a second. All right, welcome back, everyone. So the first thing that we'll go dive right into is looking at the Dogmeat as a card as a commander. So this is a red, white, green deck in the Naya color combination here. It is a 3/3 legendary creature dog. Tribal is not going to play much of a role in this deck. So the creature type isn't particularly of note. When Dogmeat enters the battlefield, mill 5 cards, then return an aura or equipment card from your graveyard to your hand. Whenever a creature you control that's enchanted or equipped attacks, create a junk token. So, what are junk tokens is probably the first thing that we should look at here. So, a junk token is a colorless artifact that has tap, sacrifice this artifact, exile the top card of your library. You may play that card this turn, activate only as a sorcery. So this can be fairly helpful for getting some card advantage, kind of going through, being able to cast things. The downside, though, is if you hit something with it that you really need and you don't have the mana to cast it, then it's just kind of gone. Um, so it definitely is useful in the right contexts and situations. Um, Now, when Dogmeat enters the battlefield, you're going to mill 5 cards and then return an aura or equipment card from your graveyard to your hand. This tells us a couple of different things about what this deck is going to do. So, enters the battlefield effect. That could be a direction that we could go with it, but I think the actual deck that was built focuses on auras, equipments, and graveyard returning. So there's going to be a lot of auras and equipments, which are by definition designed to buff and improve creatures that you have on the field. Um, and whenever a creature you control that's enchanted or equipped attacks, create a junk token. So this is going to be likely. This is probably going to be sort of a Voltron deck, is what I would have expected. Just looking at off of the commander, but not really so much a Voltron in that you're massing up one huge singular creature. Um, because there are other cards in this deck that also allow you to build it wide, not just tall. Um, but we'll get into that in just a minute. So overall, very interesting commander card here. Let's go ahead and look at the analytics and the spreadsheets, kind of see what this deck, what this precon is composed of, how focused it is, and then we'll jump right in and do. No, I'm going to cut that out. And then following that, we're going to go ahead and talk about what's going to be coming in the next videos and kind of a general overview of how I felt about this deck. So looking at this spreadsheet, the first thing that is important to keep in mind is this 2.85 average converted mana cost. That means that this deck is going to be really low to the ground, pretty easy to play with. The likelihood that you're going to draw and find yourself in a situation that you aren't able to play anything, and not only play anything but have options of what you're going to play, is relatively slim. And so the lower the converted mana cost, that's always fantastic. This deck has 11 legendary cards, not just creatures, but total 11 legendary cards. Although I believe in this case, I do think that they are all creatures. Um, we have only 6 instants and 3 sorceries. So running definitely on the lower side of those. But we have only 19 creatures as well. Now remember that we looked at the commander. The commander is primarily based on artifacts and enchantments. So we have 19 creatures, 19 artifacts, and 17 enchantments. So only having 19 creatures means that the likelihood that you draw into a creature card is reduced from other decks. Uh, but I did say earlier that you can build wide with this deck. This deck doesn't really capitalize on that capability too much. It is capable of it. Um, but with the cards, it is capable of building wide if you draw into the creatures. So that's something to keep in mind as you're looking at this deck, looking at considering making alterations and upgrading it or scrapping it altogether. Um, Looking at the color balance, we got 24 white being or the color ratio, we got 24 white being our top, followed by red, followed by green. White is 24, red is 20, green is 19 there. But if we look down at the lands, we'll notice that white and red only have 16 lands that produce those colors, whereas green, just like in the previous decks, has 18. So this mana balance could probably be a little bit better. I'm not sure. I don't think that Wizards of the Coast really takes that into a whole lot of consideration, but it's possible that they might. But that's something that I would look into making some changes to. Um, Now, as far as the actual deck composition itself goes, this deck is low to the ground and it has 19 cards that produce ramp or allow you to cast things for cheaper or free cast things or all of that. 19 cards that contribute to ramp in a deck that has such a low converted mana cost. You probably could reallocate that a little bit better. Um, don't need quite so many ramp cards. Draw cards, we've got 8 with a low CMC. I would probably want to have some more card draw in there, just to make sure that you don't accidentally play out your entire hand. 8 control cards, that's okay. That's decent. We can manage with that. 7 protection cards, that is important. That means that there are 7 cards in this deck that can prevent your opponents from controlling your own board state. Um, that's a good number. That means that you're guaranteed percentage wise to get probably at least one every game, depending on deck shuffles and things, whatnot. Um, so this deck, the 3 things that this deck does is it buffs its creatures, pulls cards from the graveyard, and creates junk tokens. Now, buff being having 22 instances is very significant. That tells you immediately that is where your bread and butter of the deck is. But look at this 24 that are marked as utility. So those are or are artifacts and enchantments mostly in this deck that don't directly buff your creatures, but they don't pull anything back from the graveyard, but they also don't really create junk tokens. And so there's a number of them that I'm not even entirely sure why they were included in this deck, other than them being Fallout cards of these colors. But we'll get into all that once we start looking at the actual deck lists. So this deck is built really with a very diverse collection of abilities and things that it can do. With that utility being 24, you can't really rely on your deck to do any one thing specifically, except for buff your creatures if you are able to get some creatures out. Um, so that's just something to keep in mind um, as we're going through this. overall, as I was playing this deck, I won the first out of 2 games that it played. I felt the low converted mana cost was very apparent. I didn't really have any issue with waiting on mana to build up to be able to play anything. It was a pretty smooth early game, and I was able to get some pretty good hits in pretty quickly. The only times that I did encounter issue was when my opponent started pulling out control cards, um, and I wasn't able to replenish the creatures that I was losing, because most of this graveyard return isn't creatures or cards, it's specifically dealing with artifacts or enchantments. So only having 19 creatures in this deck as you're getting hit with it, hit with control, can be a little bit of a downside and can be pretty difficult to come back from. So that's important to consider as you're looking at, again, as I was saying, upgrading and stuff. Um, it was a lot of fun to play. It was a different style of deck that I'm usually used to, having to rely on non-creatures as my primary engines, um, and relying on only a couple of creatures and then building up from there. Um, But overall, very fun deck. Next time, we're gonna break it up a little differently than we did with the Hail Caesar deck. We'll look at the artifacts and enchantments in one video, and then we'll look at all of the other non-lands, and then we'll look at the lands, and then we will go into the what we're gonna do with this deck in the future. But for now, like and subscribe. Thanks for watching. I'll catch you later.